the clash of the middle classes. And that is the result of two global trends. One is that in poor countries, the middle class is rapidly expanding, while at the same time, in rich countries, the middle class is shrinking, is feeling embattled, insecure, incapable of keeping and defending the standards of living that have characterized what is a middle class lifestyle for centuries. So they are feeling, that explains in part all of the street demonstrations and the riots and the protests that we have seen in countries ranging from England to Spain, even Israel, in which people take to the streets fighting and protesting against a variety of issues, inequality, the cost of housing, insecurity, public rage against governments and all that. While that is happening in poor countries like India, China, Vietnam, Brazil, Colombia, Turkey, etc., people that used to be poor are no longer poor. They continue to be poor by standards of advanced countries, but now they have disposable income. And in many ways, they can be classified as the middle class if one understands the middle class not as the middle class in advanced countries, but the middle class in these poorer economies. This is one of the most rapidly expanding groups in humanity today. By that I mean the poor that are evolving towards the middle class. They have suffered setback with the global financial crisis that in some countries have led to some of these newly acquired members of the middle class to fall back into poverty. But still, the numbers are staggering. Only between India and China and developing Asia between 1990 and 2008, 1.3 billion people joined the middle class. 3/4 of all Latin Americans today are members of the middle class. Sub-Saharan Africa, the number of members of this middle class doubled in that period. So we are looking at a great expansion of these middle classes. Ironically and paradoxically, in the same way that the decline of the middle class is creating political tensions and frictions, the expansion of the middle class is also a source of political conflict. That may sound paradoxical and be paradoxical, but the reality is that these middle classes create the expansion and the rapid progress create expectations that very few governments can fulfill at the speed in which they are created. So demands for public services are soaring in these poor countries, and the capacity of the government to respond to these demands is expanding too, but at a slower rate. Let me give you an example of where this is happening today. Chile is one of the world's most successful examples of how a poor, small, remote country goes from being very poor to being almost a developed country. It has rapidly increased. It has had decades of very high economic growth. It has become an international player, a very competitive economy. It ranks at the top in almost any ranking in terms of competitiveness, in terms of lack of corruption, in terms of performance in a wide variety of indicators. So Chile is a great example of success. Yet for the last several months, every day in the streets there are massive protests by students and others against the government. Well, these students are demanding education, and higher education in Chile is quite expensive, is mostly private, and the students want more access to freer education, and they also complain about the quality of education. So this tells you that it's not enough to have more access, and in fact the truth is that far more people in Chile now have access to higher education and university level education than ever before in the history of Chile. But these people no longer are no longer satisfied by having access to education. They want cheaper education and better education, which is much harder to deliver. Building schools is quite easy. Providing education that is high quality is very hard. Building hospitals in China or in Turkey or any of these rapidly growing countries, building a hospital and having a hospital is not easy, but easier than ensuring that that hospital provides quality healthcare. So providing public services is always a very challenging task for any government. Building infrastructure is easy. Providing the quality services that the middle classes demand is far more complicated, and that is a source of friction, conflicts, and political upheaval. Development was always understood as lifting people out of poverty, which continues to be a priority. The great majority of people in these poor countries are poor. But that should not be done at the expense of totally ignoring the needs, aspirations, and requirements of the middle class. These countries are starting to have a middle class. And therefore, having public policies that are only geared to the poor ignores their needs and lets them to the streets to protest against the government. So the central message is these poor countries, for the first time in history, we have poor countries that have a very large middle class. That was not the case, and that is not normal in the evolution, in the historical evolution of these economies. One of the realities of the new normal in the world economy is that the peaceful coexistence with inequality has ended. The 90s and beyond created a tolerance for inequality that is no longer there. And so a lot of the protests and demonstrations that we're seeing in rich countries, in fact, are a reflection of the notion that the middle class and the working class has been lifting too much of the burden, carrying too much of the burden of the recessions, of the crisis, and that there has been a shift in wealth and income from the working class and the middle class to the wealthier groups of society that is no longer acceptable. The international implications of the clash of the middle classes are huge because by definition we have a growing list of problems that no country can tackle alone. So you need international coordination, you need multilateral activities, you need synchronization. It is very hard for governments to synchronize their activities if they are pulled in different directions. If the middle class in developing countries is requesting from their governments all sorts of efforts in one direction, and the same is happening in the rich countries, one of the consequences, one of the immediate consequences is that there are no resources for multilateral activities. That both rich countries and poor countries are going to be far more limited in channeling resources for activities and goals that are not directly related to satisfying the needs of these protesting middle classes. The conflicts are not going to be defined by civilizations, by religions. We are not talking about different religions going to war with each other. We are talking, and we are not even talking about the normal, formal, traditional form of conflicts in which one army in one country goes to war against the army of another country. We have seen that international conflicts, the number of international conflicts, meaning conflicts between two nation states, that number, the frequency of that has gone down, whereas the frequency of civil wars, insurrections, and internal conflict is increasing. So that is what I just described about the clash of the middle classes is going to fuel that trend. and therefore one need not look at geography, one need not look at religion in trying to identify where the conflicts are, but look at demography, look at income distribution, look at resource access to resources, and that is going to be far more telling in terms of where conflicts are more likely to occur.